everybody. Welcome back to those of you that were in this track yesterday. Welcome to those of you that weren't in this track yesterday. We are down to the hardcore. It's always interesting, day 2 of a conference, right? It's the hardcore survivors. Those really motivated to learn are still here. And you are going to learn a lot in this presentation, I promise you. I was probably about the 3rd speaker from the main stage this week to talk about this application and this technology running on Teradata. And that's because we're genuinely incredibly excited about this. We think this is the sweet spot for the technology right now. We have long struggled, haven't we, to apply the same kind of analytics to unstructured data, the interaction data that we exchange with our customers, as we have to the transaction data that we have with our customers. And we finally have a set of technologies that can enable us to do that with much greater accuracy and fidelity than we ever had before. And we think that's going to revolutionize customer experience in all the B2C industries. And I can think of no better guide to that discussion than Gary. Gary, for those of you that don't know him, was nearly a lifer at Wells Fargo. How many years at Wells Fargo?
34 years.
34 years, ladies and gentlemen. He'd have got less for manslaughter. And he led one of the most successful AI and machine learning teams that we've had the pleasure to work with as a vendor. And more recently, Gary's joined us, and he's been spearheading the charge on this next generation of applications. So, Gary.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Let's give Gary a warm welcome.
Oh, thanks. So I am going to talk about analyzing inbound customer calls with natural language processing. This is work that I did at Wells Fargo, and all the channel analytics stuff I actually did with Teradata Vantage and ClearScape. And actually, I brought Teradata to Wells Fargo 25 years ago. So long-time customer, now obviously work for Teradata. So a little bit about customer journey analytics. So this is basically the idea of again, in a banking context, trying to identify what's the customer task. What is it that the customer needs today? Do they need a fee reversed? Do they need a new credit card? Do they have a problem with a deposit? So what we want to try to do is identify as early as possible what that customer task is that the customer is engaged in, and then make sure that they progress along what's known as the normative path, well, basically the way that the bank would like them to solve the problem. And I'm going to make the case that banks can directly measure the impact of successful customer task resolution, and more importantly, the impact of that resolution on retention and customer lifetime value, as well as the incremental cost identified with customer task resolution through a very careful analysis of the channel data as it's put together. So poor customer service design at what economists call a deadweight loss. It's an expense that doesn't benefit anybody, cost the bank a bunch of money, cost the customer time and effort, and it's to no purpose if the customer does not get their task resolved. So customer task resolution, the way I look at it, kind of has 2 important parts to it. One is effectiveness. Did the bank actually resolve the customer's task effectively? Did the customer get what they wanted? The other one is customer task efficiency. What was the elapsed time, effort, and cost associated with resolving that customer task, both from the customer's perspective, how many calls did they make, how much time did they spend on it, as well as from the bank's perspective. So the goal of customer journey analytics, in my viewpoint, is to evaluate the effectiveness and the efficiency of the bank's service delivery process. You want to look at those both directly and measure them. And maximizing the customer's adherence to that normative path of customer task resolution eliminates channel friction and increases customer engagement. The more you can get customer down the right path to resolution, talking to the right people, using the right utilities, collecting the right information, the happier they're going to be and the less resource intensive the whole process will be. So we're going to really focus on the phone channel. I integrated all the channel data at Wells Fargo, digital, branch, all the activity. The hardest by far to make use of was the phone channel data. It's really often the most important because multiple times, it's the one time that the customers express their own wants and needs in their own words. It's when they contact the bank through the phone channel. So unstructured speech and text, whether it's calls or maybe inbound emails or chat, it's the most under-leveraged information asset in the bank. That was certainly my experience. But now, with the evolution of AI-based language models, we can unlock the meaningful customer intent signals. We've heard during the conference a lot about signal and signals of customer intent. So we can unlock that customer intent, in this case, the special case of customer task, and we can democratize the dissemination of those signals across the bank's workflow ecosystem Basically, the idea being you identify what that customer intent is, what that customer task is, and you make that available to every banking application, marketing application, the customer service, knowledge management application. So the phone channel is often the escalation channel for customers. They're not able to do what they want self-service. Generally, customers would much prefer to do things themselves directly through direct channels. If they can't, they're going to escalate it and they're going to call. And they have a passion that they need to speak to the bank's representative to demand resolution of the customer service issue. So that's where all the good stuff is. I've listened to probably 1,000 phone calls. They're always interesting. Sometimes they have some bad words in them and stuff. So it's really important for the bank to really harvest and understand what the customer is trying to express in those phone calls. So I'm going to give you a little illustration, kind of helps to tell the story of what the data can do. And we're going to break it up into 3 pieces: the pre-call, what happens before the customer calls, during the call, and then post-call, after the call itself. So in this case, a customer finds that there's a payment transaction that they don't realize. Hey, I wasn't in London yesterday. I don't know what this means. So they're going to call up, and they usually, whatever the first 800 number is, that's the number they're going to call. In this case, it's for the deposit account. Certainly at Wells Fargo, we basically drop the call right into the interactive voice response unit, where you hit the button, speak the phrase. That's called front-ending the call. And the customer, in a banking context, has to authenticate. Hey, what's your ATM number? What's your account number? A bunch of prompts before they can actually do any work. In this case, the customer is going to select the prompt called payment inquiry fee before that call is then routed to an agent. Customer has to wait a little while, hopefully not too long. The bank is going to try to identify the available agent that's best suited to address the call. In this case, the call is dropped into the mass consumer queue, and that's the agent that answers the call. So the customer says, in effect, hey, I don't recognize this payment for $55 last Thursday. There's going to be a lot of qualifying questions. Maybe the customer will have to be authenticated again by the agent. Very frustrating to consumers, but it's often business practice because of fraud. And the bottom line is that eventually the dialogue, the determination is that, oh, this is a credit card transaction. It's not a deposit account transaction. And the agent says in a nice way, I'm going to have to transfer you to the credit card department. So the call is transferred. It can be either a warm transfer where the first agent stays on and introduces the second agent, or the dreaded cold transfer where the call just drops into you hear the nice music while you wait for the second agent. So in this case, the call is successfully transferred to the second agent. The agent looks through the credit card transactions, flags the disputed payment, and tells the customer, well, we're going to talk to the Visa card people, and it'll all be great. It'll all be straightened out. And the caller is very happy. Oh, this is all done, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. Well, the next morning, the customer checks through their digital banking application and finds out that that payment has not been reversed like they would thought. And guess what? They're not very happy. And this is a case of where the customer effectiveness was very poor because the customer's task was not resolved. And guess what? The customer's going to call again, and it starts all over again. Incredibly frustrating, incredibly expensive. And this is the reality of the situation. This is often what happens. So what we can do is start to build the data assets that we need to do customer journey analytics for the phone channel. A lot of times the activity starts with digital banking. We found, in my experience, Wells Fargo, about 2/3 of the time the customer was in digital banking immediately before the call or even during the call. So, and one of the things that we had learned to do is basically try to leverage better that kind of digital banking data that we collect to help us make that inference about what the customer task is. The call itself, we have to collect a lot of these different data from customer telephony integration, basically the system that manages the transfer of the call. There's a lot of cool data in there. There's a lot of valuable data in that IVR data, the key value pair data there, very complex. And as the data goes through, we get to the really good stuff, which is the actual call itself. And I'll talk about how you can use natural language processing to unlock the information inside recorded calls. And then eventually, of course, there is post-call analysis. Often there's invitation for a customer satisfaction survey. So is this makes your experience? Everybody's been through this as a consumer?
Recently.
Probably not pleasant.
No.
And one of the reasons why it's not pleasant is most organizations don't really invest in the data capture and data processing. because you really have to get the full set of data to actually understand why the customer task was or was not resolved effectively. And then, of course, we're going to talk a lot about what you can get out of analyzing the recorded call, sentiment, the transcript, stuff like that. So in my experience, we've developed quite a number of analytic and diagnostics that we're really going to look at. We found out, well, how many customers call in a month? It's about 25% of the bank's customer base. 10% of those speak to an agent. Bad news, when we had that customer drop into the IVR, 15% of the time we couldn't authenticate them in the IVR. They didn't know the card number. They didn't have the right information. So they would have to call again. 15% of the time, the inbound calls were routed to an agent. You always would like that to be lower. You like to be able to do more with self-service. We got pretty good at making sure that the calls were transferred pretty efficiently to the first agent. And then we get into the bad stuff. The bad stuff is the diagnostics about how long that call lasted, excuse me, and how many of the calls were transferred. About 20% of the calls had to be transferred to a second or even a third call center agent. Very bad, I can tell you, from customer satisfaction and more importantly from customer retention. Anytime a call is transferred on the margin, there's going to be more customer attrition. Very frustrating for customers. You can try to do your best to manage the call itself. It usually lasts about 400 seconds. Some are longer, some aren't, depending upon what the customer task is. And then probably the most important thing is up there in the northeast corner of this slide. The key metric that you really want to focus on is the recontact rate. What percent of the customers who called and spoke to an agent called again within 24 hours? Anytime that happens, on the margin, greater risk that customer is going to leave the bank. It is the single largest driver of customer attrition we've ever found. Customers are very unhappy if they have to call back because their first issue was not resolved. We found it was as high as 20%, way too high. Started a big program and project to try to reduce that. And the key technique to reducing that is to, once again, figure out what is that customer task? What is the thing that they want? And what's the best resolution path to resolve that? A call about fraud tends to be longer, it's more painful. Questions about their deposit account is shorter and less painful. So it's all about what is that customer task in the course of resolving it effectively. So once again, this is what we're really focused on, customer task effectiveness. Did the bank resolve the task to the customer's satisfaction, not to the bank's satisfaction? You got to make sure that the customer is happy with it. And the critical diagnostic for that is, once again, what percentage of the inbound phone calls did the customer call back in the next 24 hours? Anytime that happens, it's bad. Customer task efficiency, what was the elapsed time, effort, and cost? The duration of the phone call itself is the key driver of cost to the bank. How long that agent's on there costs about in the States, costs about $0.015 per second for call time. But you can think about it both ways. The efficiency argument is both from the perspective of the bank, resources that the bank has to expend, paying for the phone agents, but probably more importantly is from the customer's perspective. How long were they on the phone? Once again, were they transferred, or did they have to call again? So we have a framework that we've kind of evolved to and talk about a lot. It's this idea of signal as a service. The basic idea is that we want to really leverage our investment in data and analytics to identify a signal. So we organize the correct data in a feature store. We apply a whole bunch of different analytic techniques and models. And those models are really trying to find and identify a signal. In this case, a signal that the customer is at risk to leave, or the signal that maybe the customer is interested in buying another product, or just the signal that, hey, they have a 24-hour recontact. We want to persist those signals that we identify through applying analytics to data into workflows, and those workflows are going to be supported by bank applications. One workflow, of course, would be the call center and knowledge management system that the call center agents use. We want to persist all this information that we're capturing there. We also want to make it available perhaps to our fraud mitigation team. A lot of these customer tasks and payment issues are going to be around fraud. And of course, we want our centralized marketing application to know about it, because guess what? If a customer has an unresolved customer task, are they more likely or less likely to buy another product from the bank? Well, they're way less likely. So the number one thing you want to know in marketing and banking is, does the customer have an unresolved customer task? You got to resolve it or they're not going to give you any more business. Does that make sense? All right. So we have a strong belief that the richest signal comes from the richest set of features. So no matter what analytical techniques you're using, traditional econometrics or machine learning or AI, you're going to get the best signal, and the models are going to be most effective if they can harvest the broadest set of data. So I have a little saying that I like to say, so good models, good data makes good models. Novel data makes great models. If you're able to collect data in a form of something you know is important, like what the customer's telling you on the phone or the customer's experience in your branch location, that is really going to be accretive and additive in a positive way to your models. So on the left, we're going to obviously leverage our structured data about the customer profile, the products, the transactions. All these things I've worked on in my banking experience. They're all important, but the really, really good stuff is when you get into the unstructured data, the speech and text, and your ability to leverage that, and maybe even video and images if you have the opportunity to it. So the data is all going to be collected together. It's going to be harmonized and made consistent through a set of features. The model operates on those features, and the goal of the model is to distill and identify these signals. In this case, a signal of customer intent that we can persist in our workflows and applications. So that's why you have data. You have data to solve problems. And I like to call this last piece, when we're persisting the signal into the workflows, you really want to do it at the point of decision. You collect data and use models in banking when you want to make a decision. Do you want to waive a fee? Do you want to approve a payment? That's the whole rationale for the infrastructure in data analytics, is to help the bank make better decisions that it can use to help customers. We also believe that the strongest signal comes directly from the customer. We want to collect and harvest all that data that we collect in those routine customer banking activities. There's amazing information you can get out of payments data if you spend a lot of time looking at it, really understanding like who a customer is paying. It can tell you a lot about their lifestyle, about their budget. And once again, the richest data comes from the customers who are speaking to us directly. And the one opportunity we really get to see that at scale is in those calls that are generally recorded when customers call up the bank. To do that, we're going to apply a lot of different language tasks. This is basically natural language processing. So the call is recorded. We apply these language tasks that come from a family of language models. We're going to look for things like sentiment analysis. Was the customer happy, unhappy? Guess what? If they're calling up the bank, they're generally not very happy. This idea of named entity recognition. This really helps us with identifying customer tasks. What is the customer talking about? Did they say the word card? Did they say the word payment? Did they say the word fraud? Did they say the word hate? All of those things can be very important to collect in those through natural language processing. And you can extend that even beyond speech, of course, to documents like contracts or other written documents. All these things together we bring through, we interrogate through a family of language models. We distill them, and we want to deliver that signal, which in this case represents the voice of the customer. And then we can extend this further once we've invested in the analytical infrastructure and the data and the models, and we expose the signal and the persistence of these signals. We can think about this in the context of a publication subscription framework to various applications. We can constantly be monitoring the data to look for these signals. Once again, one would be a risk of attrition. And we can publish that to other applications that they can then deliver and use in their decision-making process. Like we talked about, if the customer has an unresolved customer task, their marketing, the likelihood they're going to buy another product is very low. We definitely want our marketing application to know that. But we can even go the other way. We can actually even have applications subscribe and ask for updates on this information on a daily batch basis or even on a real-time basis. Hey, what's the latest thing you saw or heard about my customer in these channels? So this infrastructure can be delivered. Teradata can help support that. And I can tell you from experience, it can be incredibly impactful. It really is a game changer if it's done correctly. Once again, the whole point of investing in data analytics is to deliver signals and deliver those signals at the point of decision. When you say, what's the next best action? What's the offer I want to make? Do I want to approve a transaction? So we're going to look at a special case of customer journey analytics. This is about complaints. Complaints are sort of the most challenging of all inbound customer communications. And in the United States, there's a regulatory agency called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Their consumers can directly forward a complaint that they have. It could be in writing, it could be a call. Said the bank or the credit bureau didn't do right by me. Hey, CFPB, you're a regulator, do something about it. The CFPB gets about 1.3 million of these complaints directly from customers. They're verbatim in their own words. And about 2/3 of the time, the CFPB actually follows up with customers. So this is very evolved over a very long time, but now a very important regulatory response that banks need to address. Not only is it important because they want to keep the regulators happy, but it also, if you look into it, it's actually an incredible resource to understand the quality of customer task, effectiveness and efficiency. And I like to think about complaints. Complaints is like the tip of the iceberg. At the very top are the people who just feel motivated to complain. But for every person that has that experience, there's a whole multiple of people who had a similar experience. They're too busy. They don't think anything will happen. So focusing on complaints for a bank is going to give you unparalleled insight into the success of your customer service resolution process. So beyond the regulatory dimension to it, I've really always advised banks to look at their complaints and also look, because it's public data in the US, you can look at the complaints about your competitors, and maybe there's some competitive information in there, right? What are they doing right or wrong? This is an illustration of leveraging natural language processing. We developed a Teradata customer complaint analyzer. You can see it outside if you're interested in seeing it. In this illustration, we actually, as Martin talked about earlier, the many different ways that you can use language models. In this case, this was joint work with AWS Bedrock, where we used those customer complaints and through an API process expose them to Bedrock. But it's a great illustration of the different dimensions of the insight you can get from looking at customer complaints. You can do sentiment analysis like we talked about. Obviously, generally, customers are not very happy if they make a complaint, but you can look at the degree to which they're unhappy. How negative is it relative to other populations? You can classify the complaints. In this data set, a lot of people were not happy about the Discover credit card account and this word cloud. You can do, I think, something that's very valuable if you like clustering. I love doing clustering stuff. K-means clustering. You can cluster complaints to see what are the concentration of complaint topics, what are complaints almost like that. Oftentimes, consumers will use different words about the same thing, and applying clustering to complaints is a great way to get the bigger picture, the gestalt of what customers are really worried about. A really attractive thing you can do, and it's really matured as a technology, is complaint summarization. There's this technique called chain of thought, where you can ask language models to summarize a document or a set of text. And oftentimes when consumers send in their own words complaints, it's a little jumbled, the logic is kind of hard to understand. But chain of thought does a great job of organizing a logical way, a summary of that complaint, which is very valuable for the call center agents or the bank representatives that need to follow up with customers, because then now they have a pre-digested, much more logically oriented summarization of what the customer has said to them that they can use when they reach out to customers. Wouldn't necessarily recommend using generative AI in this context to reach out directly, but it can be a great tool for the contact center agent to use when they reach out. All these techniques are very valuable and provide a tremendous amount of insight that once again is accretive to the insights that are gained from traditional structured data, transactions, payments, channel interactions. And now we're going to get to the heart of the matter, and I'm going to walk you through this slide. There's a lot to it, but it's pretty exciting. So we've been working on natural language processing with Hugging Face models. Hugging Face is a French-American company that's like a model repository where open source models, and there are thousands of people all over the world constantly developing models and evaluating them. So this can be made available. So you can use pre-trained PyTorch NLP open source models that are available from Hugging Face. And the key thing here is that PyTorch can be made available to use inferences and data that's stored in Teradata Vantage through this thing called ONNX, the Open Neural Network Exchange. It's a standardized way to conform data so that are results from models so they can be applied to making inferences about data. Teradata is spending a lot of time and energy on something called InVantage scoring model, basically extending beyond the ClearScape applications today to make it broader to accommodate this idea of bring your own model, bring your own language model. And the really important thing, which was touched on previously, but I really want to emphasize, is that it allows our customers to take advantage of Teradata's shared nothing CPU parallelism. As we all know, Teradata is a parallel harness that allows processes to run concurrently. And in this case, we can actually use language models and score them in parallel, which we've demonstrated can be as effective, or sometimes even more effective than using GPUs, graphic processing units. It's a more at hand, more cost-effective way to do it. And the other benefits to it, which are the next bullet points there, is basically you can make it more facile to extend your analysis of the structured data you're already storing in your data tables, but daily and historically, with now these insights that can be gained by natural language processing by leveraging language models that are available through Hugging Face. It's actually super cool, and I can tell you that some big banks in the US are really excited about this, because I know from working at a big bank, banks often have the resources to look into things, the state-of-the-art AI, but it's very difficult for those state-of-the-art AI models to be made available to business units. There's a lot of constraints, regulatory, legal, that prevent that. So this is a great way that we can now help our customers deliver the technology of natural language processing directly to business units. And once again, there are quite a number of techniques, some of which I've talked about already: text summarization, text embeddings that was mentioned in some of the previous sessions. That's important for the Teradata roadmap. You can do quite a number of different language processing applications, because you're basically breaking apart the large language models into smaller components of models that actually do these activities. And the last one on the right is the one that gets me really excited. I was the first person ever at Wells Fargo to do speech analytics working with a vendor. Now Teradata can help support audio to text, actually operating on the recorded speech that is available, because pretty much every bank, certainly in the US, records its calls. So you can directly unlock that speech into text to make it available for all this natural language processing. Pretty exciting. A popular technique is what's called wave to vec. There are a couple different techniques. In fact, there's a whole library that's available now in Hugging Face that you can use. 3 years ago, you could only do this with a very specialized vendor. 8 years ago, when I first looked at it, there was like one vendor in the world that could do this. Now, pretty much anybody who wants to invest in it working with Teradata can do it themselves, taking advantage of this Hugging Face library. It's pretty exciting. It is kind of a brave new world. And since there's a lot of good stuff in that unstructured data, because one time your customers tell you what they want and need, now you, working with Teradata, Vantage, ClearScape, bring your own model, can address that directly. So kind of getting down towards the end here. So customer journey analytics is a component of a comprehensive view of customer. The way I really like to describe it is there are a lot of specialized techniques. We need to look at things like documents and emails. We talked about voice and chat. But it's really accretive, and it's only best leveraged when you've already harvested the data you get from transactions, channel activity, and payments. So once that data is now available, and Teradata can help support this, it's all in one place together, and it can help you with what often is an important strategy of this idea of hyper-personalization, or really trying to address your customers on a one-to-one basis. And voice of the customer plays an incredibly important role in that, in conjunction with data collected, more traditional data from other channels. So that data is processed together. We interrogate the data, structured, semi-structured, and unstructured, to identify the signal of customer intent. And once again, that signal can be made available. In this case, it's the next best action workflow. So if you really want to know what the next best thing is to say with a customer, make sure you know what they just said to one of your bankers, or what they just did in digital banking. Don't wait for a daily batch or a weekly cycle. So here's our key takeaways. Hopefully you found this of interest. Customer task You got to know, and certainly in banking, what it is that the customer is trying to do with you. The most important question is, did the bank resolve the customer's task to their satisfaction? The litmus test is, did they contact you again the next day? If they did, you didn't solve their problem no matter what your survey tells you. Customer task efficiency, let's look at these different customer tasks. What was the effort associated with their resolution, what the cost to the bank, and more importantly, the pain for the customer? The richest signal comes from the richest set of features, extend beyond structured data to include obviously your digital banking data and all this unstructured data from speech and text. The strongest signal comes directly from the customer. I think anybody that has a relationship with a bank understands that there's no substitute for customers telling you directly what they want. Unstructured speech and text data are extremely valuable, but also very challenging to evaluate. But now there's a whole new set of technologies and tools that are available to us to address that. And natural language processing models allow banks to unlock the signal that's buried in that speech and text, because it's been buried for a long time, but now you can unlock it and use it. And finally, customer journey analytics is a critical component of your customer view of the customer. How customers interact with you to solve problems, to maybe explore a new product, to find out about how to get your kid or college checking account, which I just went through. It tells you a lot about what their needs are and what their relationship is with the bank. And with that, I thank you.
So Gary, firstly, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. I mean, you said a ton of really interesting things, but there were two things that I think that really stuck out for me. So the recall rate, if I call the call center back within 24 hours, that's the single best predictor in your experience
well,
in banking?
you have to have an underlying model that says, well, what's my relationship with the customer, what their products are, how they're using those products. So you have to have as sort of baseline knowledge.
Yeah.
But then if you look at a recent activity, any data that you can collect, the 24-hour recontact rate is the single thing that on the margin is associated with customer churn.
Wow. I mean, that's a really interesting insight right there. And then just fascinating to hear your excitement about the journey that we've been on the last few years, right? 8 years ago, nearly impossible, only one vendor that could help me. 5 years ago, still really hard, a handful of vendors. Now a library of open source models that can do the heavy lifting for us with greater fidelity and accuracy in some cases. And it's just a question about how do I integrate them with the rest of my operation, and what's the best technology platform to run them better, cheaper, faster? Exactly. And that's an amazing journey in 8 years, isn't it? Look how far we've come as an industry, folks. I've got a ton of questions for Gary, but it's not all about me, as my wife often reminds me. So have any of you got questions that you would like to ask Gary? Daniel has got a question. Wait for 1 second for the mic, Daniel, and then Gary's all yours.
Thank you, and congratulations on the presentation. Did you explore in terms of the usage of some internal tools? So obviously you had the agent, in the workflow that you described. Did you have it use, say, update the status or a customer flag or segment or any other tool that you have internally that the agent was required to work with?
Yeah, so the information that the agents have available to them is somewhat limited in terms of, it's usually just the traditional product holding, how long they've had a product, some maybe distilled information. We've really tried to push to amplify that with more things that come out of models, and I did a lot of that work myself, originally with bankers and branches and then with call center agents. And what's the risk that the customer will leave? We ended up with like colors, like traffic lights, red, yellow, green. What's the likelihood that the customer will buy another product? So we really try to use the models to distill down the insight to make them available to the call center agent. Okay. The challenge that they have is they're under time pressure and they're kind of bombarded with information. What we found was the single most important thing to identify is that customer task. Can we help that call center agent when the call drops on their screen, and there's this thing called a screen pop, that the agent, it pops right in front of them, telling them what we think the customer task is, fee reversal, disputed payment, made a huge improvement in the productivity of the agents, that reduced the cost to service the agent, and actually made the agents much happier in their jobs. And we saw an interesting increase in actual retention of call center agents just from that.
Wow, that's an interesting insight as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought one of the points that you made really, really well during the presentation, Gary, is it's really easy for us to focus on the cost to the bank of serving that call, and shorter is better because time is money, and we don't want to invest more in the call center than we have to. But there's a the customer's time has value to them as well, right? And the longer it takes to figure out what they need, want, and fix that issue, you're also burning the customer's money, if you like, as well.
Yeah, and one interesting thing that I discovered with some great research, this idea of customer efficiency, that if you think about banking, it's co-produced. The bank is a set of products and services and ways it does things, but the consumer also is involved. They have to communicate what they want. They have to think about how to use the bank's tools to solve things. So it's a joint process. So the more efficient you can be as a bank in understanding what the customer wants by leveraging what you know about them, what they're telling you, the more seamlessly all processes can be delivered, less time and effort on the customer, which is the whole goal of convenience in retail banking. You want less time and effort on the customer, but it also ends up being much more efficient and cost effective for the bank.
Yeah, fascinating. Anybody else out there got questions that they want to? Yes, sir. Just 1 second, wait for the microphone.
Thank you. Yeah. So that word Tvec you're kind of talking about as your transcription service, does that take all of the transcription costs out of your application?
I would say it takes all the transition costs. It allows you to make the tool of leveraging vector embeddings to exploit language models so that you can do the process of taking speech or transcripts and make sense of that and conjoin it with other data. So it's a technique to use. I wouldn't say necessarily takes all the cost out of it, but it radically reduces the cost of any kind of translation or annotation.
And I guess maybe part of the challenge here, Gary, but it'd be interesting to get your experience. As you say, and I think your question is, we've got other technologies that do some of this throughout the organization. But that's, I guess, part of the challenge, right? You've got lots of silos of information, but actually if you want to do what you've just been describing well, you've got to be able to put all that together.
Yeah, one of the things that we found is there are many different parties of interest, and that's one of the arguments for basically doing an inference on the CPU and is the concurrency, right? You have a fraud team that's looking for certain things, customer service team is looking for other things, and the same transcripts of the call are the same written documents. So now they can at the same time go after that transcript using whatever tools, whatever filters they want, because we can support that now in Teradata. So many different audiences for the same information. There are probably at least a half dozen that come to mind at Wells Fargo that look at the same customer communications but have very different things that they're looking for and very different techniques.
And sorry, I think I talked over you just as you were about to ask a sub-question.
No, I mean, my sort of sub-question was almost, I don't know, we've done a similar exercise, represented it back in a sort of Power BI tool, if you like, but you seem to have taken it to the next, where you're now putting it back in front of the agents and doing all sorts of other downstream application stuff. So kind of, was your journey to getting to that, you kind of started with looking at the data and then it naturally morphed into that, or you kind of, that was always your target end state?
Yeah, I would just restate that idea I said before about good data makes good models, novel data makes great models. We knew that this was important because one of the things when I started supporting the call center, I had to listen to calls. And you could just, there's all this stuff in these calls, but it's just, you had to listen to it or try to type it up to get anything out of it. And I said, there's got to be a better way. And that was 8 years ago, led me to the first vendor that could at scale do transcription through natural language processing. And then we found that, especially since we invested in all the other data, transactions, payments, and channel analytics, that it was really accretive. You just got way more out of anything you could do that was first-party data from customer communications because you already had a good base to work from. So, it was the gift that kept on giving. The more we spent time and energy to collect these subtle things, verbatim customer commentary, the more valuable it was.
Cool. I think there's a question behind you.
I noticed on your slide at the beginning when you were talking about that customer's actual journey, your example, there was quite a lot of pain points along the way of them coming through on the line for the wrong product and various things. So did this analysis help you identify the pain points and prioritize them, as well as, because some of those things couldn't be resolved with the agent that they spoke to, it would be other things. So were there other benefits from?
Yeah, there was one of the early benefits because previously all those channels were in a silo, classic banking. They were all their own world. And literally before I got involved in it, no one had ever tried to link the data together. So no one even knew what the fallout was, what the problems were. And one of the things that we discovered pretty early on, and I mentioned it on the slide, is customers called. We took by time using Teradata NPath technology to do customer sequencing through time. When we looked at the customer's calls, and then we looked at that same customer and started looking at the digital banking application, again, we found 2/3 of the customers are in digital banking when they're on the phone. Nobody that worked for Wells Fargo knew that. In fact, I had to spend like 2 months proving it out to senior management because they didn't believe it. It was just so counterintuitive that nobody would thought that that would be true, and that led us to a lot of operational things. What can we do better in digital banking to understand what's not working? What are the data we can figure out a way to persist and publish to the knowledge management applications for the call center agents, so they had an idea of what was going on. The ability to take all that disparate silo channel data and bring it together as one thing and interleave it through time was really game-changing for the retail bank. In fact, led to reorganization of many of the business units in the retail bank.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? And I don't know how many people in this room use Empath Analytics, but it is incredibly powerful tool.
It's the eighth wonder of the world.
It is the eighth wonder of the world. I mean, especially in that exploration and discovery phase that we were talking about this morning, the ability to visualize those customer journeys with a Sankey chart can be incredibly powerful. One or two of my data scientist team get a little bit sniffy about it because they want to be doing more hardcore data science. But I mean, as a way of getting to grips and developing those basic insights that then inform the things that you want to do next, and also for creating features in some cases, it's incredibly powerful, right?
We use the Sankey diagrams, which is the flow, the kind of rivers of data thing. It's a great tool to use for people who aren't necessarily very analytical, because they can engage in it and see what's happening, and you can see the path. And then we were able to take those different paths and then describe them in data and build models to even look at sort of what the persistence was across these different customer task resolution paths. But there's no substitute for it. We use Tableau to visualize them a lot, although. But
I forgive you. It's okay.
Okay.
They're a valued partner. But I mean, actually, think about that. You know, we like to talk about how data analytics is transforming our companies. But an Empath Analytics and a Sankey chart caused the bank to reorganize its functions. I mean, that is pretty dramatic business impact right there, isn't it? Yes, sir. You have a question. Oh.
I was just going to mention that our Teradata reps had recently showed us Empath function, which is we already have in ClearScape Analytics, and we didn't realise, and I haven't done much work with it, but I was wanting to do so, and that's just given me great endorsement to get on.
I'll just make the comment that Empath runs every second of every day at Wells Fargo. So we have this idea of the customer journeys, we call them sojourns, almost 3 billion a month, all are created through the Empath algorithm running on all that channel data. So you talk about scale, performance, being robust. It can do it at scale.
Yeah, and it's yours, as you say. You've already paid for it. All you've got to do is start using it. And just very quickly, I'll say that I feel the same way about the geospatial analytic functions in Teradata. Amazing. You've all paid for them, and hardly any of you of them are using them. Every time you copy large volumes of data out of Teradata to a GIS tool to do what you could have done in Teradata anyway, a kitten dies. And you don't want that on your conscience, do you? Yes, sir.
I'm feeling really bad now. Anyway, no, thanks for that. Yeah, I'm just wondering, you know, this is a hugely busy area. You talked about those volumes. So I was just wondering, and actually I'm now confused about the path, the reorganization bit, but did you have a test and learn approach? What did that look like? Did you compartmentalize this into, well, we'll deal with, say, unstructured email before we go and do speech? And then how did you roll it out? But I suppose where I'm confused now is that if you had to reorganize the pipeline itself, you know, did that mean you had to sort of think more structurally about the reorganization before you could start to implement and get?
Yeah, I'll try to clarify that. Sorry if that was not clear. So the journey was over a very long period of time of integrating all this channel data. You know, it started for me in digital banking because I developed the first digital banking data warehouse at Wells Fargo, all in Teradata. So digital banking was first. I'd worked in the branch world, so I knew where the branch data was. The phone was by far the hardest to do. We talked about the IVR and the phone agent. So a lot of it was just collecting the data, normalizing it, modeling the data, using Empath to sequence it. And then we started learning more and more stuff. The reorganization comment comes from that discovery that 2/3 of the time, customers who were talking to a phone agent were in digital banking. That led to a reorganization. The phone contact unit, which was in a totally different part of the bank, was merged in with the digital banking unit, which was a major reorganization for the bank. And that happened once again because of the ability to see the customer's actual experience and say, The only way we're going to get better at reducing costs and resolving things in the phone channel is to leverage the knowledge we're getting from the digital banking channel, because it's right there.
But you had been achieving incremental gains or iterative gains before that. Is it?
Oh yeah, it was all, everything was incremental, because I was a pay-as-you-go kind of a person. I only got money to do more fun stuff if I improved a process or was able to make traction in terms of these tactical improvements. So yes, it was an incremental process, and be very happy to talk to you about that in any forum after or online if you'd like. I can go through the whole story of how we paid as we went to get this to happen.
And that is probably a good segue to lunch, because I think we could continue talking with Gary pretty much all day, couldn't we? Because it is a fascinating story. But Kevin will get grumpy with me if I don't let you to go to lunch soon. So let's please show our appreciation one more time for Gary.
Thank you.